Good morning, everybody. Last day. Um, Hope everybody has been enjoying the week. We will have a little bit to make that clear here today. One of the many traditions of connections that we had to figure out a virtual equivalent for is thanking the folks that were most responsible for having it really work. In years past, we would get the folks that were handling logistics, folks that were handling admin up in front of the group on the last day so we could clap. Well, we can't quite do that, but we can do an equivalent. So first, I can just thank them all and some of the people that really made a big difference. Brooke Duran, Hannah Sullivan, Allison Peter, Jocelyn Sobel were making us look smart, making us look competent, because they were identifying problems and fixing them before they ever went out of over the airways. And then all the other event planners that helped out at various times during the week. Jeremy Pinsky was the person that first got us in to CNA as far as starting the process of getting CNA to host. And of course, the president and CEO of CNA, Kathleen McGrady, none of this would have happened without her her involvement, her support. I'm very, very appreciative to the whole team, and also to the people on the planning committee and all the rest that worked almost for a year straight to have this happen. So I'd like Brooke and Hannah and Allison and Jacqueline to turn on their cameras for just a moment. So even though that we can't bring them to the front of the room, at least you can see the faces of the people that made this happen. So very good. Excellent. Thank you. And it's technically too difficult to turn everybody's mic on and clap and turn them off again. So if you could put into the chat your thanks to these fine folks, I would very much appreciate it. I'm sure that they will appreciate it too. Good. We see just a few comments coming in chat. That's very, very good. Now, another reason I'm so appreciative to the whole gang is that they worked hour after hour tirelessly to come up with a really comprehensive online poll. And I want to get to Tom quickly, but if we could just bring up that poll for just a quick minute. So there you are. So please participate in the poll, and wanting your unbiased opinions of all that they put together. And as every late night talk show host has attested, it's not the same without hearing the audience reaction, but that's hopefully you all enjoy that. Okay, I don't want to steal any more of Major Tom's time. One of the newer traditions and connections is for the last couple of 4 years, we've been trying to make sure that our Friday keynote was a real wargamer, somebody who was in the trenches, that did a lot of wargaming and really got into the nuts and bolts of making it happen. And Major Tom Mouat is perhaps the United Kingdom's most prolific wargamer. He is involved with the service schools, with their joint staff, with just so many different aspects of their wargaming, and kind of a big deal. He's a member of the British Empire, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it's got to be important because he got to meet the Queen. So Tom, thank you so much. Oh, and he's also one of the 4 founders of Connections UK. So, very good. Excellent. You can all see the results of the poll. Very good. So, Tom, again, an honor to have you speak, and a pleasure as well. So take it away.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am here on the Friday slot, and I'm a full-time reservist. So part of my job is to be a little bit controversial. So hopefully I'm going to try to do some of that today. So, trying to work out, oh, here we go. So I'm going to talk about wargaming and AI. A lot of really bright people have already spoken about this already, this connections. So it's going to be a sort of random thoughts from a guy who's dealing with this, is being asked to provide advice to organizations that are doing it, and looking at how some of the organizations are trying to develop stuff in this area. And one of the things that I want to take a look at is whether we're doing this in a cost-effective way, or is this just another senior officer shiny toy AI? I want some of that. Usual disclaimer to start, this is a personal view. The MOD is small, but it's still way bigger than I might know. And I might have missed something. And also, I'm a full-time reservist, serving way beyond retirement age. So perhaps I'm a little bit bitter and cynical after 42 years in uniform. I'm going to start with the obligatory dead German quote. This is from General Franz Hadler. At the end of World War II, the US military decided to conduct a study to try and find out why the Germans did so well. Because after all, their industrial base was absolutely awful, but their soldiers fought very well. And one of the reasons that they believed that was because of the wargaming. So there was a study that was written and published in 1952, and the foreword to that had Franz Hadler saying, these were unofficial manuals. We wanted to avoid even the slightest semblance of regimentation, to maintain full freedom and give no formal instructions of any kind. And I found this absolutely fascinating when I discovered it quite recently, because there's an awful lot of people out there who say, oh yes, we're looking for the ultimate game. We're looking for the one way in which we can teach wargaming. And this speaks to me that there is no one way. There are war games that are suitable for different purposes. So attempting to sort of put a cookie cutter approach on it and say, this is how you should wargame is doomed to failure. I'll follow that up with the obligatory live professor quote. Professor Wong here, wargaming can encourage initiative and adaptability. And I think those two areas will give you some clue where I'm coming from as the old guy in uniform trying to teach this and trying to provide advice for this. I'll start off with a little thought experiment here. If we're talking about zombies, everybody has an opinion. If you say what would you do in the zombie apocalypse when driving through the countryside, particularly in the UK, people can point to a castle or something like that and go, yeah, that's the place I'd go to. Because everybody understands the idea of zombies, to the extent that the CDC has their own, how to survive a zombie apocalypse manual. And the point is that you can have an intelligent conversation because everybody's aware of, more or less what zombies do. Of course, depending on which film you've watched, there might be fast zombies, there might be shufflers, there might be ankle biter zombies. It doesn't really matter because you can explain those differences very quickly and you can have an intelligent conversation. And that's one of the fascinating things about AI, because very few people really know. And I mean, David Broyles earlier was talking about AI terms and definitions and the fact that no one can agree exactly what is AI. And I have to say, I agree with him. Does it really matter? If what we get out of this is useful, then the fact that we can't agree on a definition is irrelevant. And that's as true for AI as it is for wargaming. Because let's face it, no one can agree really what a definition of wargaming is. Sorry, Peter. Oops. Now, we have wargaming for a purpose, and there are a number of purposes. Course of action development, training, practicing procedures, understanding system capabilities, current force strategy, future force development, trying to discover possible futures. Education, this is where I come from, understanding, discovery, that sort of thing. One of the really good reasons you want to do wargaming is efficient situational understanding. You can get an enormous amount across in 2 or 3 hours of a war game, which no amount of G2 PDFs sent through the system and you're invited to read will ever teach you. And then finally, there's the Tom Schelling point that wargaming is really useful for understanding the people that you're going to have to work with and rely on in the future. In fact, Tom Schelling listed this reason as one of the 3 most important reasons for doing wargaming. And yet, most of the stuff that I see relating to AI is to do with course of action development. We want to make this faster, we want to make it better, and we want to make it cheaper. And yeah, okay, that's interesting, but for me, wargaming covers all these other possibilities. So I want to give a couple of examples that the UK is looking at the moment. The MOD has paid Improbable a sum of money in order to provide a concept demonstrator for wargaming. Actually, it's not really about thousands of people playing multiplayer video games. Improbable have an operating system called Spatial OS, which is designed from the ground up to be scalable by default. So you could build a building, you could build a small group of buildings and provide that with absolutely as much data and fidelity as you could possibly imagine. You can have people coming to work in the morning, you can have them sitting at desks, you can have them doing stuff and then going to coffee at lunchtime and having a sandwich and everything else. And that can have a fantastic amount of detail. And then using Spatial OS, you can say, okay, give me 100 of those, or give me 1,000 of those, or give me 10,000 of those. All you have to do is get on to Azure or Amazon Cloud and say, spin me up 10,000 cores, and I want to have a whole city, because the operating system is designed to cope with that idea for massively multiplayer online games. Now, this was demonstrated to a senior officer who suddenly thought, wow, I can do multiple simultaneous courses of action testing. So I can look at a city and I can go, you know, what happens if I do a frontal attack? And then what happens if I go left flanking or right flanking, or do a vertical envelopment, or if I go in through the sewers? And what happens in each of those if I change the force ratios, if I change the proportions of tanks to infantry? Do I have armored infantry? Do I have, you know, wheeled infantry like Boxer or something else? And I could simply set this up using this scalable operating system, and then copy it and copy it and copy it, and do 10,000 copies of the same thing. And then I can evaluate all those courses of action and hopefully, you know, get a good idea what's the best one. Now, I was asked to go along and talk to these guys about this, and it's oh shoot, sorry. Well, that's really going to put me off. Yes, don't hit the keyboard when you're waving your arms about. So I was asked to go along with these guys, and the issue is, of course, the company makes an operating system. It doesn't make a simulation. So they're all looking at the MOD guys who go, yeah, we want some of this. And they're like, well, why don't you hire some developers and they'll make it for you? But the MOD's like, no, you've got this thing, you make it. So, not being stupid, they went and hired a load of coders and they started to code. But of course, they had no idea about the military. They had no idea about how things actually work. But in some cases, in some areas, that was quite good, because you didn't end up like with most Ministry of Defense simulations, where the interface looks like it's been designed by a guy who's got a degree in Excel. You ended up with an interface that was actually quite usable, because, you know, young people who are used to mobile phones and stuff like that, one thing that they're really impatient with is a bad interface. But the company's now got a defense contractor with a lot of history in defense. So hopefully that's going to get better. So I'm looking at this system, and the idea of it is to be able to do multi-domain, multi-dimensional integration, where you can have feeds coming in from space, you can have cyber electromagnetic spectrum, you can do the standard military stuff that you expect, a bit of human geography, critical national infrastructure, and terrain. But one of the things that struck me is that people will come along and go, where's the AI in this? And it's like, oh yeah, no, we got some AI. We've got this idea that we can train a bot, and it will look at Russian feeds, and then the AI will be able to exactly replicate a Russian bot. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're going to be literally playing with yourself. You know, oh, no, you could practice messaging against the bot. And I'm going, well, that doesn't work in real life. And you're looking at me as a military guy, and we're talking about messaging, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, shall I get my battalion out on the tarmac outside? And shall I get them to get all their phones out and go, on the word of command, tweet? That's kind of ridiculous. How's that going to work? And then we started talking about terrain, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. You've got these amazing visuals of terrain. How did you get that? And the guys go, oh, that was great. We got it from OpenStreetMap. And I'm going, OpenStreetMap? Wow. Yeah, you can get that really quickly. It's open source. Everybody updates it. You're getting the terrain data from the internet. Burger King had a 15-second advertisement on how wonderful the Whopper was. And the guy stood there and he said, 15 seconds isn't enough to tell you what's in a Whopper. So, okay, Google, what's in a Whopper? Whereupon all of those with Google-enabled devices at home, it would suddenly burst to life and say, a Whopper contains 35 fresh ingredients, whatever, the first time. But this is the internet. All those kids out there rushed to their computers, realized that the Google answer came from Wikipedia, so they edited Wikipedia. And the next time the advertisement came up, Google said, a Whopper has dead babies, rats' tails, and fingernail clippings in it, because that's kind of how it worked. Now, of course, we would never use open source intelligence like OpenStreetMap to plan a real operation. I'm sure we would never do that. So let's move on. I want to talk now about another company that's doing something. And this is an Israeli company called Unique AI. And I saw this tool, and it was one of the most exciting things I've seen in a very long time. one of their tools allows you to do plan evaluation at the sub-tactical level. You can look at a terrain database, you can put your intelligence in there, and you can plan your route and everything else. And then the AI inside will come back and go, your plan A actually has you leaving your jurisdiction. It's going to be visible for 35% of your approach march, and you'll be attacking in the final attack uphill, and therefore it's going to be really tiring and difficult, and therefore give you a traffic light view about whether your plan's any good. It was fascinating. It was absolutely brilliant. Again, is it really AI? I mean, it's pathfinding algorithms that are recommending routes and evaluating them. I'm sure there's some AI in there, but does it matter? I don't care actually if it's AI, because it's good. But then I got to thinking, and I'm like, there's a bit of an issue here in that you need a really detailed database. Well, this is Israel. They have a really detailed database. I mean, 2 centimeter resolution LiDAR data. That's fantastic. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, God, it's difficult to get, because, you know, if you fly over and there's a cardboard box in the road, you know, is that a cardboard box or is that a concrete anti-tank obstacle? And what happens when you fly back and it's moved slightly? You know, how do you actually clean that database and make sure that it's right? And then what about trees? I've had this before with Israeli officers. You know, certain times of the year when the trees have no leaves on them, I mean, their appreciation of terrain and visibility and intervisibility is fantastic. But the difference that the seasons make, because they tend not to fight in areas where there are vast changes in seasons, they don't necessarily appreciate it quite so much. That's not to say Israel doesn't have forests. There's a program of actually planting trees, which is quite amazing. But you have to understand the level of effort to get to that. I mean, it's an amazing thing. I absolutely recommend anyone to go and have a look at it, but then sit back and say, how difficult is it to be able to get that? Oh, and then of course you need perfect intelligence to work out where the bad guys are, which the Israelis kind of have, and most of us perhaps not quite so much. But one of the things that struck me before I leave this slide was that it does give you a chance to rule out the really stupid stuff. And that actually is an advantage. Now, I do some work with the Higher Command and Staff course. It's an international course. We get 40 colonels and 1-star officers. And they do an exercise where they're looking humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in Somalia. They come up with different plans, wildly different plans, unbelievably different plans. Some of them want to go in there and destroy Al-Shabaab and make the place safe for humanitarian assistance. Other people want to go to the nearest country and send in a few training teams so that the Somali government can fight Al-Shabaab. You know, really heavy metal to really light touch. And they're incredibly diverse, these plans. And I just thought to myself, if an AI had been looking and recommending courses of action, it would kind of recommend stuff in the middle. You know, if we're talking about that bell curve, it's not going to look at the outliers. It's going to suggest things which are optimized. And that kind of worried me. Because if we optimize, there are a couple of things that happen. If we optimize, you end up being predictable. And then everyone focuses on that. This is the F-35. How many reports have we seen that the F-35 is not going to be as good as people think it is? I've been involved in loads of war games where the F-35 never got to do anything because the enemy have spent all their efforts on trying to stop the F-35, which makes me think of that naval thing that the winning weapon at sea is not your best weapon. It's your second best weapon, because your best weapon will focus the enemy on it and they'll stop it. The other thing, of course, is that with optimization comes fragility. And there's a classic case, coronavirus and toilet paper. You know, the use of toilet paper is absolutely constant. You know, people go to the toilet, but we have a pandemic and nobody goes to work. And at least a third to half the people are using that pink scratchy toilet paper they get at work. And now they're buying white comfy bum because they're working from home and the system can't cope. And we end up with what we end up. So that worries me. The other thing about AI machine learning is that crowdsourcing is amazing, but it's not always good. And we have to be careful. Colonel Boyd earlier said that we need to make sure that our data is AI ready. Now we have data for our direct fire engagement system, and we've collected the data for years and years. Of course, in the finest tradition of defense procurement, we said that we wanted to collect all the data, but we didn't say we wanted it in a format that we could actually look at. So it took quite a few years before we actually paid to be able to understand the data. And we did, and we looked at it, and wow, fantastic. And then we looked at it a bit more closely and discovered there was an enormous number of friendly fire incidents early on in every training exercise. I thought, God, what was this? And the answer is, of course, soldiers being soldiers go, is my gun working? And they point at the guy next to them and they shoot them. So you really need to know when the actual exercise started and when the guys were testing all their guns. The other thing we discovered was that there were no hits on the tanks on the side. There were only hits in the frontal arc and the rear arc. And we thought, wow, this might be really interesting. You know, why is that? And the answer is because the sensors didn't work. We'd been using it for years, and we didn't know that the algorithms for damage calculations didn't allocate hits to the side of the armor. I mean, they fixed it pretty quick, but you know, getting your data AI ready is really important. Another thing that came up, of course, is oppositional thinking. That really focuses the mind. People in Hong Kong doing fantastic stuff with messing about with AI and facial recognition. There's the other thing, of course, which I like, essence of toaster. You're training an AI to recognize stuff, and it stores that information as a reference image. The issue is, if you can find out what that reference image is, and you show it to the AI, it ignores everything else and goes, yep, it's a toaster. So if I stick that on my helmet and go out, will the AI not shoot at me because I'm a toaster? Another thing that's really interesting is the elephant in the room experiment. Google this one. They got an AI to recognize things in a scene really, really good. And then they introduced something into the scene that was just wildly different. I mean, not a problem. The AI looked at it and went, well, it's big, perhaps it's a couch. That's not the issue. The issue is all of the other things in the room, the level at which it was able to recognize plunged. So instead of recognizing 90% of the things in the scene, it only recognized 30%. It was as if the AI saw the elephant and went, wow, what the hell's that? And kind of forgotten the rest of its stuff, like cognitive load for AI. So what are my conclusions? Poking fun at AI is a bit lazy. I love doing it, everyone does. But I've been in uniform for 42 years, and I have changed my position in the last 2 years on AI. I think we're getting something, even if it is only how to fix stupid. What one of the guys said, COA, course of action evaluation, falsification, finding out the really dumb ideas and chucking those away. But I don't see clear objectives. You know, what are we trying to achieve? I mean, a lot of these are optimizing for conventional forces. And I don't see comparative studies between here's this 10 million pound AI enabled, you know, cloud-based scalable architecture thingy, and it'll give you 56 courses of action. And let's compare that against a paper map, a couple of cardboard counters, and the commander's intuition, and go, you know, how long is it going to get that? How much is it going to cost? How good is it in order to effectively make a decision quickly? And I don't see those balance of investment reports. You know, cardboard counters and paper maps are really cheap. Getting people to use their brains to think about a problem using a manual war game, that's really cheap. Or presenting them with a black box that gives them a million different alternatives. I'm a little bit suspicious and worried about that. So my conclusion is using AI in defense needs a clear understanding of what we are trying to achieve. We've discovered, and lots of other people have talked about it earlier, that you can get a lot by just messing about. But is that the purpose of defense? It's all right for you guys in the States where your level of resources are huge compared to us. But I'm not sure it is, because for us, we don't have those resources. So we're all watching you to see if you get anything out of AI before we spend too much. And one of the other things that came up is we have some lessons here from the cyber world. The normal ways of development and procurement for AI type projects is probably not going to work. So you need to use different ways, and you need to experiment and experiment properly. And then you'll learn. So, Tom Schelling quote to finish up with, of course, no matter how good you are, you're never going to draw up a list of things that would never occur to you. And that's where manual wargaming comes in. And the AI may do this in 10 or 20 years' time, as Colonel Boyd said, when your data is AI ready, but it's certainly not there right now. So the Marines are getting rid of their tanks. Is that optimization to the point of fragility, or is that a gigantic leap into the future where people have sat down, thought about it, and say, how can I best provide utility for the future in an area and an arena of constant competition? Time will tell, but my bet is on the Marine Corps. So I thought I'd finish with a joke. Of course, it's not really a joke. It's not funny. It's the truth, and we know it. And then I got to thinking about, you know, AIs do memes and motivational posters. Now, some of those are just weird. But others of those, you kind of think perhaps the AI isn't wrong. And lastly, I want to leave you with my personal favorite. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So we've got a couple questions lined up. It sounds like there is a continuing need for manual simulation rather than AI to develop ideas and tactics. Would humans in the loop be a way to teach AI to emulate humans in manual simulation?
Having humans working alongside AI is a really good idea. Trying to get an AI to emulate the human decision-making process is going to be really difficult. So there are advances that you can do at getting AI to speed things up and to make it, faster, and that's great. But if you work alongside with human intuition, then you'll get an advantage. I mean, one of the things that struck me is the idea with the bots of replicating the humans. And the thing about social media and interfering with that is you're trying to make people get angry. So angry that they're going to do something in the real world. So when you're looking at AI, when you can get Siri and Alexa and OK Google to lose their temper, then come back and we'll talk.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on AI being used for, you were effectively driving at this just now, AI being used for political considerations of military operations, thinking beyond the kinetic for changes in ethnic tension or corruption?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, but as Professor Wong tweeted yesterday, we're going to have a clear understanding of metrics, and from that we're going to have a much greater understanding of social science behind it, because you need to have those metrics. There was some speculation in the Ministry of Defense about how we evaluate our approaches at the higher political level. And should we look at things like alliances? Should we look at things like deeply held beliefs, democratic process, things like that? And I said to them, yeah, this is fantastic, but you have to ground that in social science, and then you're going to have to benchmark that. And the interesting thing about benchmarking something like that is, let's take the ultimate example of a high-level political idea. We had a treaty with Poland where if anyone invaded, we'd go to war. That was in 1939. And when Germany invaded, we went to war. So there was a calculation that was done at the highest level that we went to war because we signed a treaty to guarantee their territorial integrity. So you benchmark your system with all of the understanding of social science against that extreme example. And then go and look at the Ukraine. Because we signed a treaty with the Ukraine guaranteeing their territorial integrity. And when the Russians invaded, we didn't go to war. So your system has to be able to cope with the differences between your model in 1939 and your model when the Russians invaded Crimea. Because if it doesn't, then it's completely useless. So attempting to do that with AI at the higher political level is going to be fraught with difficulty. Good luck with that. I'd love to see you try. And I mean, there was some fantastic stuff that Peter Williams was talking about, trying to evaluate things in the gray zone. But I think we should be doing that because that'll give us ideas. But without that underpinning understanding of social science and how that works in different countries, you're just building on sand. You'll never get anywhere. Thank you.
By the way, in chat, we've had several people pipe up saying that they are able to either they know of people who ticked off a Google language processing experiment in which the AI shut down. And one person, Laura, whose full name I can't quite, Laura Bosco, says, quote, "My daughter and her friends can make Siri angry." So,
well, yeah, there's Siri being angry, and then there's specific words and phrases that are intended to stop people messing about. So, you know, but if it makes the kids think that Siri's getting angry, then that's useful. You know, I don't care whether it's real AI or not, and it's faking it. It doesn't matter. If it's useful, then we'll go with it. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to expand on one of these questions a bit. Is the right answer to limit what you're asking the AI to try to do? It can't replicate the full human, but maybe if we restrict it to only handling a few subset of human tasks, does its applicability go up? And I'm going to expand that to, congratulations, you are now in charge of AI research and development for the UK. Please set its priorities and the goals that you have in mind.
Okay, a great friend of mine has a sort of a big handful's idea of different types of AI. There's the loyal pet AI, which does a very, very single thing well. And the idea is, you know, it just does that thing. So you're driving the car type AI, you know, it's great. It reduces accident. It's absolutely fantastic. Until, of course, a truck is halfway across the road and stalls, and then your AI thinks it's a billboard and tries to drive you underneath it, which is bad. But overall, it's still much safer. So that's your loyal pet. And then there's the idea of the sort of bright slave AI, and that's where it's got a little bit more intelligent. You're focusing it in the direction. I want you to give me patterns, and I want you to give me suggestions of alternatives and things like that. And that's great. And then, of course, you have the evil Moriarty class AI, which is just going to kill you. And the answer is we don't need that general AI, which ends up as our Moriarty class AI. We need the loyal pet and the bright slave to do things for us efficiently and effectively and very fast. So the difficulty, going back to Colonel Boyd, is finding the data sets that are open to being analyzed, that we can analyze, and then get at a way of making things work better. Bearing in mind, of course, that in defense, if we optimize it to the ultimate degree, it's going to be very fragile. So we need to have a way of putting resilience in there. So what we really want to do is to look at the problems that are susceptible to solutions from AI. We need to find the things that AI is good at and then point the AI at them, rather than saying, hey, I've got this course of action thing, oh, and there's AI in there. And the general goes, wow, that's fantastic, shiny toy, I'm going to buy it. Now, in some cases, it is a shiny toy and it actually works. And it may not have any AI in it at all, but who cares? If it works, we're going to use it. But in other cases, just because it's AI doesn't mean it's ever going to do anything right. Thank you.
I had to unmute if I'm going to start talking. Apparently, I don't have enough AI. Do you think the problem with trying to define AI is that folks talk more about it as a solution as opposed to an enabling technology that can contribute to solutions?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, there's that old saying about to err is human, and to really screw up requires a computer. Well, to unbelievably, disastrously, awfully screw up, it takes an AI. So exactly as that question said, yes is the answer.
So, oops, another
Oh,
question
one
that's come
more.
up. Sorry, Matt.
Last question.
Last question. All right. Assuming we can get even one AI right, is it only right for the culture that produced it?
Absolutely. And there's very good examples. There's an AI translation, Google translation, of Turkish into English. Turkish has an impersonal pronoun, O, which is not gender specific. So if you're translating into English about something, then the AI has to choose whether it's him or her, unless it gets convoluted in how it does the translation. So we've got these very good documented examples about when they're talking about doctors, it translates as he. And when they're talking about nurses, it's always her. And when they're talking about someone who's lazy, it gets translated as her, because when you're looking at the majority of published words online, you get biases from the way that those words are being used. So if you've got an AI and you're putting it together, it's got those biases in, unless you're very careful. So you need to be able to adjust for that. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much. And James, thank you for being the moderator. I really appreciate both your efforts. And the next time you see the Queen, please say hi to her for me. And thank you all very much. See you in 15.